The conventional understanding of the war on drugs paints it as a straightforward fight: heroic good versus pure evil, dedicated law enforcement against vicious poison peddlers. It's presented as a noble global crusade to purify society from the grip of addiction and violence. This war is framed as a modern epic, complete with fearless heroes and black hearted villains, where every arrest and every seizure is a clear point for the winning side. But behind this neat official story lies a much darker, more cynical, and far more brutal truth. A maze of betrayal and political games that goes beyond the public's imagination, one that rips off the mask of morality and exposes the hidden motives behind a war fought in the name of the public good. This essential truth doesn't come from a leaked intelligence document, at least not just from there. It comes from a file that is far more intimate, more personal, and surprisingly more credible. A direct testimony passed down from the flesh and blood of the cocaine king himself, an individual who was forced to live in the shadows for years, carrying a historical burden and family secrets too great to bear alone. This is the story that will open the Escobar File, a testimony that proves in stark detail that the war on drugs was never just about drugs. It was about power, control, and a deadly dance between supply and demand that was never honestly acknowledged. This file doesn't just reveal a hidden side of Pablo Escobar, it reveals the dark side of the war that claimed to have defeated him, a war that may have in fact created the very monster it claimed to be hunting. Let's examine the beginning, not in a quiet Colombia, but in the chaotic Medellín of the 1970s, a city that would soon be transformed into an epicenter of unimaginable violence, luxury, and destruction. As the world was just getting to know cocaine, a new commodity promising instant euphoria for the user and incredible profit for the supplier, a man named Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria emerged from the shadows of poverty and limitless ambition. He wasn't just a common criminal, he was a brilliant architect of crime, the mastermind behind the Medellin cartel, an empire that would come to define terror, deep rooted corruption, and unthinkable wealth. From a petty car thief, Escobar quickly rose through the ranks, not just selling drugs, but brilliantly building a system, a terrifying global machine coordinated with the precision of a multinational corporation, but run with unmatched brutality. His cruel philosophy was simple yet proven effective: Plata o Plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet, a choice that was never really a choice at all. With this mantra, he conquered law enforcement, politicians, and even ordinary people who dared to oppose him. An arrest in 1976, which should have ended his career, instead became proof of how deep his corrupting roots had grown. His truck was found with 39 kilos of cocaine. Escobar miraculously walked free. The judge was bribed. The two agents who arrested him were murdered the following year. A clear, cold, and brutal message to anyone who dared stand in his way. He was unstoppable. He was the law. With every transaction, every ordered murder, every bribe paid, his wealth grew exponentially. He was a dark King Midas where every touch turned cocaine into mountains of cash. At his peak, the Medellin cartel was believed to supply 80% of the world's cocaine. This number, if we just pause for a second to really grasp it, is a terrifying statistical anomaly. They smuggled 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every single day. The money was overflowing, with nowhere left to store it, buried in remote fields, hidden in the walls of safe houses, or even, in a dark twist of irony that became a criminal legend, burned to keep his young daughter warm while hiding in the cold mountains. This is the Pablo Escobar we know from headlines and TV shows, the monster, public enemy number one, the main villain in a global epic of good versus evil. This is the official story that, for decades, has shaped our perception of the war on drugs, a story filled with heroic crime fighters and the pure evil of the criminal. But this story, it's like the beautiful facade of a grand building that's rotting from the inside. It's incomplete, it's not entirely honest, it covers up fundamental cracks that, if exposed, would bring the whole foundation of our understanding crashing down. And this is where our file, the real file, begins to open. Not in a sealed government archive, not in police investigation notes, but in the heart of a young boy who was forced to watch and feel every moment of that madness up close. For 2 decades after his father's dramatic death, a death that closed an entire era, Pablo Escobar's son, Juan Pablo Escobar, lived in silence. He was forced to hide behind a new identity, Sebastián Marroquín. He wasn't just an eyewitness to his father's dark empire, he was an indirect victim of its endless violence. He was the heir to a throne who flatly refused its legacy of terror, choosing a life of exile and anonymity to keep himself and his family alive. When he finally decided to speak, after years of reflection and wrestling with his own history, Marokin didn't just tell his father's story from a perspective we'd never heard. He challenged the entire world. He challenged the very narrative we have all swallowed whole, the one that has become the foundation of our understanding of this global conflict. In his painful, honest book, Marokin wrote a haunting dedication, a bitter epitaph for the father who chose a path of darkness, for my father who showed me which path not to take. This is not a son defending his monster of a father. This is a testimony from inside the inferno, a desperate attempt to find truth in an ocean of lies and myths. And this is the first part of the Escobar File that rips apart the illusion. Marroquin firmly criticizes popular series like Narcos, which is widely accepted as the truth. He said, and I quote directly, Narcos is the way the United States is telling the world their version of the drug story. This is an incredibly bold statement, a slap in the face to Hollywood and the mainstream narrative. But what exactly does he mean by the American version? Aren't we just seeing the undeniable truth that Pablo Escobar was the villain and those hunting him were the flawless heroes? This is where the uncomfortable truth begins to creep out from the shadows, like thick smoke from a hidden cocaine lab. The war on drugs is often painted as a war between the good guys, America and the Colombian government, and the bad guy, Escobar and his cartel. However, Marroquin points to a crucial fact that is often deliberately erased from the American version, a fact that shows just how hypocritical this war really is, how dirty the hands of the clean heroes truly are. That fact is us, the consumers, the users sitting comfortably in their homes in North America and Europe, demanding a non-stop supply of cocaine. Marroquin argues, and I quote, my father couldn't possibly have gotten cocaine into the United States if the Americans weren't buying it. Remember that number? 15 tons per day. That isn't some abstract, invisible demand. It is a massive, unquenchable thirst coming from the very nations that were most loudly declaring war on his father. This is the unspoken dark side, an unwritten deal, a deadly dance that was never acknowledged. We will provide the product if you provide the market. Without that giant market, without the billions of dollars flowing from wallets in America, the cocaine king might never have become so rich and powerful. He was the giant shadow cast by that greedy demand. This is the first, most fundamental rewrite of history. The war on drugs was not a one-way fight, it was a horrific symbiotic relationship, a global transaction that benefited both sides, even if only one side dared to claim the moral high ground. So who actually created this monster? Who was feeding this beast? This question forces us to wonder, was this war really about stopping drugs and protecting society? Or was it just about controlling the supply, dictating a convenient narrative, and pointing at a scapegoat while the wheels of the system kept turning and the profits kept flowing? The Escobar File exposes this lie, revealing that the loudest voices in the war were the ones most responsible for the endless demand. The Escobar File also blows open the most crucial, most haunting moment of the entire saga, the final days of Pablo Escobar. The official narrative planted in our minds is that he was shot and killed on a rooftop in Medellín by the Colombian police, a heroic joint operation that marked a huge victory in the war on drugs, a heroic and satisfying end to the hunt for a monster who had terrorized the world for so long. The raid on December 2nd, 1993, in the Los Olivos neighborhood happened after the Colombian National Police, the search block, successfully tracked Escobar's phone calls to his family thanks to advanced technology supplied by the United States. According to the official version, Escobar was killed in a shootout while trying to escape across the rooftops. The police forensics report stated that Escobar had gunshot wounds to his torso, legs, and fatally one bullet to the head, just above the right ear. This official narrative insists that the headshot came from the pursuing strike team. However, Sebastián Marroquín's testimony paints a far more complex, more tragic, and much more mysterious picture. A truth that, if accepted, would drastically change how we see the end of the Cocaine King. December 2nd, 1993, Escobar's last day, Marroquín, still a teenager, was on the run with his mother and sister. In an atmosphere of pure fear and desperation, he spoke to his father on the phone, a call that, according to Marroquín, would change everything, not just for his family, but for the entire story of the war on drugs. For years on the run, Escobar had one golden rule he never ever broke: never stay on the phone. The calls could be traced. He was an expert at survival, a paranoid genius who was always one step ahead, who built complex surveillance networks and secret communication methods. But on that day, he broke his rule repeatedly. Marroquin felt something was wrong. His father sounded defeated, tired. Not the arrogant cocaine king who always had a plan, but a desperate man, cornered and torn apart by the relentless hunt. Marroquin begged him, "Papa, don't call anymore. They will kill you." But as if driven by an invisible force, moments later, Escobar called again. In the middle of the conversation, an interruption, a pause that felt like an eternity, and then he suddenly said, "I'll call you right back," and hung up. Those were his last words. The call, just as Marroquin feared, was traced. Shortly after, his hideout was stormed. The official story claims he was shot dead while fleeing, a victory for the heroes. But this is where the biggest mystery emerges. Why would the most wanted fugitive in the world, a brilliant strategist who was always one step ahead, suddenly get so careless in his final moments? Why did he keep calling, as if he wanted to be found? Was this just an unexpected, fatal mistake from a tired man? Or was it a final, deliberate act from a man who knew the game was over and chose his own way to end the show? Marroquin himself strongly believes his father committed suicide, shooting himself in the right ear. He claims this was based on his father's promise to always shoot himself in that exact spot with the last bullet in his pistol to avoid capture, and is backed by Marroquin's own analysis of the forensic report, which he argues is consistent with a close-range suicide shot and not a long-range sniper shot. This claim rewrites the end of his story. His death may not have been a simple heroic victory for an elite squad, but the tragic end of a man who knew his game was over. He wasn't just defeated by his enemy's bullets, but by exhaustion, despair, and perhaps by the very game he himself had created, which finally swallowed him whole. His death becomes an ironic symbol of a war he never won, but also one he never truly lost. So, what have we uncovered from the Escobar file? What fundamental lesson can we learn from the testimony of a son who chose to speak out against the dominant narrative? The Escobar file isn't just a captivating crime story. It's a mirror reflecting an uncomfortable truth about what's really happening behind the curtain of the war on drugs. The narrative we've been fed about good versus evil, heroes versus monsters, is far more complex and stained with impurities. It's a painful reminder that endless demand, hypocrisy, and power politics often play a much bigger role in creating and sustaining monsters than just the ambition of a single drug lord. After opening the Escobar file, after seeing the evidence that challenges the entire story, what do you think? Does the narrative of the war on drugs that we all know need to be fundamentally rewritten? Or are we still trapped in a conflict where the goals are far more complicated, darker, and more concerned with power and profit than with true justice for all? Write your opinion and your analysis in the comments. To unseal other archives that have been deliberately hidden from the public, subscribe to Underworld Archive 9 and turn on your notification bell. Thank you for watching.